Good morning, good morning, good morning. How's everyone doing today? Hey, take care. Have a good day. Wife is just heading off to work, and I'm getting ready to start here this morning with the lecture. How's everybody doing today? Give me a quick sound check. Everybody doing well? Can you hear me well enough? I got my Colombian coffee mug this morning. Good to see you, Rasha. Good to see you, T. All right. Fantastic. Hello, Eli. It's good to see you as well. Looks like we have a good crowd in here today. All the good people. Melody Webb, Sarah King, good morning. Thanks for coming today. I surely do appreciate it. Today is Thursday. We are in week 4. It is exam week. You know, the exam breaks tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You have all weekend to finish the exam. I'm going to be doing an exam review tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. on YouTube. You can find the link on your Blackboard page. And I'm going to be going over the exam question by question to make it just as easy as I possibly can for you. Okay, so I hope you join me tomorrow. But today we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of classic theories in psychology. Good morning, Amin. Good morning, Cole. Fantastic. Great to see everybody today, Dearica. Thanks for coming. Coffee is definitely key, Trevor. I can't do anything without it. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you remember on Tuesday, we talked about developmental milestones, and I talked about the biological changes that happen to the nervous system as you develop. If you remember yesterday, I suggested to you that we study development in 3 areas. We study biological development, we study cognitive development, and we study personality or socio-emotional development. Human beings develop along these 3 dimensions. Now, we talked a lot about biological development yesterday or Tuesday because biological development underpins everything else that possibly happens. It's the developmental changes in the nervous system and the biology of the nervous system that allow the mental and personality abilities of the human being to develop. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about one theory of cognitive development and a theory relating to socio-emotional development. So, we're going to start off by talking about this fellow named Jean Piaget. Has anybody ever heard the name Jean Piaget before? Good morning, Cosette. Good to see you today. Good morning, Amin. Good to see you as well. Has anybody ever heard of Jean Piaget? If you go by the number of times you've been cited by other psychologists, Jean Piaget is one of the most important psychologists in the history of psychology. He has been cited, his work has been referenced more times than any other psychologist. And Jean Piaget offered the first theory of how human beings' mental abilities develop. So he asked the question, where does mental ability come from? How does a human mind go from thoughtless, reflex driven animal to a complex, reasoning human being? So human beings are born without any intellectual abilities, really, except for a set of protective reflexes that we talked about on Tuesday. And these reflexes go away in the first 6 months as the child begins to develop their own voluntary abilities. So, how do we go from an infant that knows nothing to the wonderful, intelligent people that are sitting here in front of me in the lecture today? Where does mental ability come from? Jean Piaget was both a biologist and a philosopher, and his theory blends, if you will, biological development and also what we call epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. And he developed a branch of psychology he called genetic epistemology, which to him was the biological development of knowledge. That's basically what his theory was about. And he suggested You can think of human beings' intellectual abilities as being built on this atomic structure we'll call the scheme. The scheme is a mental representation that helps you understand and interact successfully with the world. Schemas can be very simple and they can also be very complex. What's an example of a scheme? If you see a scheme, if you hear a noise, turn your head and look at it. That's a scheme, if you will. That allows you to understand and interact with the world. If you want to hold something, reach out with your hand and pick it up. That's also another scheme. And then we have complex schemes. Like my mother in law is a nice person and she likes for me to bring coffee when I come to see her. And it makes her happy. Bringing her coffee makes her happy. That's also a scheme. Basically, a scheme is a set of mental representations that helps you understand and interact with the world. It can go from as complex, as simple as turning your head to look at something, all the way to knowing how to interact with another human being. Okay, so they go from simple to complex. And what Piaget argued was that human beings' first schemes were based on reflexive behaviors. They were learned from their reflexes, and these schemes start to evolve as the human being tests them out in the world. Now, how did he learn all this? He developed his theories studying his in two settings. The first was case studies, where he studied his infant children as they developed during the first weeks and months of their life. He had three children, and he did three case studies, studying each and every one of these individual children. He also used naturalistic observation. He would go to schools, playgrounds, and other areas where young kids would develop, and he would study the children's behavior in these social settings. And so he used case studies and naturalistic observations to develop his theories about schemes. And he argued that those schemes start small, they evolve and become more complex through two basic processes: assimilation and accommodation. So, assimilation is finding out where you can use a scheme successfully. And accommodation is when you learn that a scheme doesn't work in a certain situation and you have to change it and make it more complex. So, are we having any glitches today? Cosette's talking about some glitches. I'm looking at my stuff right now, and I'm not seeing any glitches. Although, you know what I do need to do? I completely forgot. I'm going to go ahead and close Teams out so that that doesn't eat up my memory. Okay, there you go. Does that make it any better, Cosette? Anybody else having trouble? All right. So, how does assimilation and accommodation work? Here's a cool thing. My young son, his first word was dog when he was about 11 months old. All right. And he, the first word we had a little dog, a little Yorkshire Terrier, and my son learned the word dog. And a dog to him was a four-legged furry animal, right? And so when he learned that word dog and the object that word symbolized, he used it a lot. So whenever we would go over to a friend's house, they might have a big dog, they might have a big furry dog, they might have a small dog. And every time my son saw a four-legged furry animal, he would use his word that he had learned, because he had learned this scheme for dog. And he would go, doggo, doggo, and he would point at it. And so it was kind of cool. We would go, and my kid learned that dogs can be big, dogs can be small, dogs can be furry. And every time he saw a four-legged animal, he used his schema. He assimilated his schema by finding out all the places it would work. And so he was finding out that he could use his schema for dog, a four-legged furry animal, in lots of different places. Now, one day we took him over to our friend's house, one of our friend's house, who is not a dog lover, but a cat lover, right? And so when we walked in the house, my son saw a cat, a four-legged furry animal, and guess what my son said? Guess what my son said that day? He pointed at that furry little cat and he said, "Doggo, doggo." Now we all laughed because it was clearly not a dog, it was a cat. And my son didn't understand the categorical difference between dogs and cats. So we all had a great laugh, and then we pointed out to my son, no, this is not a dog, CJ, this is a cat. See, dogs go bark, bark, and cats go meow. And so my son had to learn that his dog schema, a four-legged furry animal, had to be changed a little bit. And he learned that dogs are four-legged furry animals that go bark, bark, and he accommodated his schema to understand that dogs were not four-legged furry animals that went meow. Now, what Piaget argued is that we have these first schemas that we develop. Okay, the child learns to look at things that interest them. They learn to look at sounds. They learn to hold things, and all of these are simple schemes, if you will, plans for interacting and understanding the world. And then what happens is, as they interact with the world, they find that these schemes don't work and need to be adjusted. And so the basic building block of Jean Piaget's theory is that human beings have these simple ideas that become more complex through environmental testing. Okay, so we have schemes that are assimilated or accommodated. Now, Piaget argued that if you looked at human beings, you could notice that human beings sort of evolve through four distinct stages of ability. So if you go out there and look at a 2-year-old child or a bunch of 2-year-old children, you're going to find that those 2-year-old children have a certain mindset, a certain way of thinking about the world that's going to be different from 6-year-old children. If you look at a group of 6-year-old children, you're going to find that they have a certain mindset and way of thinking about the world that is different from 13-year-old children. If you look at your 13-year-old cousins and children and friends, you're going to know that they all have a distinct and similar way of looking at the world that is different from adults. And so, the insight that Piaget first realized was that human beings' mental abilities evolve and they're qualitatively different. 2-year-olds think different than 6-year-olds, who think different than 11-year-olds, who think different than 21-year-olds. And he argued that there were characteristics that made these evolutionary stages, if you will, completely different from one another. And so what he suggested was that human beings move through these four stages. And he described the qualities of this intellectual ability. So he argued that human beings start out in what he called the sensory motor stage of cognitive development. What does this mean? He argued that human beings start out pre-symbolic. What do you mean by symbolic, Chris? Symbolic is understanding that objects represent other objects. So the word cat means a four-legged furry animal. Dog means a four-legged furry animal that goes bark, right? I know those symbols, if you will. When you say cat or dog, I know what you're talking about. I have symbolic ability. I can think about something that's not here. I can think about my dad or my mom, or I can think about my car because I can represent them in my mind. I am symbolic. What Piaget argued was that children start out in a pre symbolic period. Okay, and so he said that children are pre-symbolic and largely unable to form mental representations of experience. Children are born with reflexes that develop into mental representations of the world, but the child doesn't start out with these mental representations. And he learned this by looking at his three children during these long case studies. And he began to believe that these children did not have the ability to form mental representations. Now, why did he think this? He, he believed this because children did not demonstrate two normal abilities that all of us have. The first is object permanence, and the second is objective self awareness. What he discovered was that children in their first year or so of life did not appear to have these two symbolic qualities that we normally think of as quite obvious abilities. What are object permanence and objective self awareness? Object permanence is knowing that an object exists even if you can't see it. Now, I'm not looking at my phone right now because it's down beside me, but I know that if I look over here, I can pick up my phone. See my little cell phone. Now I drop it down here. I'm not looking at it, but I still know it exists. That's what we call object permanence. I can't see my car right now, but I know I have one, right? And I can think about it. I can think about the color. I can think about the size. I can think about the garbage that's in it, right? So I have the ability to understand that objects exist even if I don't see them. That's what's known as object permanence. Just your thoughts and memories of objects. Yes, that's basically what it is. Our thoughts and memories of objects and people. And it's our understanding of what we need to do with our body to see these objects. So, um, yeah, a mental representation is just a thought and a memory. And so he argued that children don't really have these thoughts and memories, Cossette, right? And the second ability is objective self awareness. If you ask me who Chris Roddenberry is, I could tell you about that person because I know that he exists as an object too. Now, what Piaget demonstrated was that he demonstrated with two particular tests that children in this first year of life do not have object permanence or objective self awareness. All right. So what he would do is, I've got a video in the course resources folder that you should take a look at. And basically, what he found was he could put a toy in front of a child and establish that the child wanted it. He would then put the toy on the ground, cover it with a blanket, and he found that the child would immediately forget that the object was there and act as if the object never existed. What he found was that children did not seem to understand that objects existed unless they were looking at the object. Okay, that's called object permanence. And what Piaget found was that children did not completely demonstrate full object permanence abilities until sometime later in their second year of life. So children are limited to those things that they can sense or move or touch or feel. And things that are gone, that are out of sight, are in a sense out of mind. People that Blind people cannot have visual memories. Do you know why these visual memories go away eventually? Um, no, that's a good point, Cossette. I've also heard that blind people don't dream visually either. And so, and that's sort of a modern mystery that we don't understand completely just yet. But I would agree with you. When people lose their physical vision, they lose mental abilities related to those visual abilities. Kind of bizarre, isn't it? Now, the second thing he used to demonstrate that children don't have these symbolic reasoning ability is what he called the Rouge test or the mirror test. Now, if you look at this picture of this child right underneath me, what you'll notice is that on this child's notice is a big black dot. All right. So what he would do is he would take children of varying infants and toddlers of varying ages, and he would secretly put a mark on their face. So they'd be holding the kid, touching the kid, and they'd have some colored mark on their some ink or something on their hand, and when they touched the kid, they would sort of just smudge a color on the kid's face without the kid knowing it. They then put that child in front of a mirror and they look to see what that child does when they look at themselves. Now, if you look in a mirror and you have a black dot on your nose and you do this, that means you understand that you're looking at yourself in the mirror and that you've noticed that you have something on your face. You have objective self awareness. You know who you're looking at in that mirror. Now, what Piaget found was that children before about the age of 18 to 20 months or so, when they looked at the mirror, they often acted as if they were looking at another person. Children, infants, did not seem to understand that that was them. That they were looking at in the mirror. And he argued that this was because children didn't have objective self awareness. So, object permanence, understanding that something exists, even if you can't see it, means you have that object stuck in your mind. And knowing when you look at a picture of yourself that that, in fact, is you, is another mental or symbolic ability we call objective self awareness. And what Piaget believed was that until sometime around the age of 2, children hadn't completely mastered these symbolic abilities. All right. So he argued that the first 2 years of life are what we call pre-symbolic. And he identified this as the sensory motor stage because they're caught in a world of sensory experiences and motor behaviors. They are pre-symbolic. What are other symbolic abilities that children don't really develop until the second year? Well, language use doesn't really appear until sometime in the second year. If you think about it, language is a symbolic ability. Reading can't occur until you understand symbols. And so, in a sense, what he argued was that human beings go through a pre symbolic period. Does it last till 2 years? Is it 18 months? Is it 20 months? You know what Piaget said? Don't get hung up on the time. He said it's sometime around 2 years. But basically, there is a period in your life from birth until sometime in your second year when you really don't have fully symbolic ability. Okay. Trevor Braverman says his German Shepherd has no objective self awareness. He stares at himself in the mirror and barks. Absolutely. You know what? That's a great question, Trevor. A great point. Evolutionary psychologists have been trying to figure out to what degree objective self-awareness is a uniquely human ability. And it turns out that some animals do demonstrate objective self-awareness, especially the higher apes and the big monkeys. They seem to have objective self-awareness, but you're right, a lot of animals, Trevor, don't have this symbolic ability. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. So he argued that we all go through this pre-symbolic period. Now, what he argued was that sometime during the late second year, we evolve into a different stage of intellectual ability he called the pre-operational period. Children at this point are symbolic, but they're not quite logical. And if you ever notice children who are 3, 4, and 5, these children love pretend to play. They love to play fireman. They love to play doctor. They love to play family. You be mommy, I'll be daddy. They love to play with action figures. They love to play with things that tell stories. Children in the between the ages of 2 and 7 are develop great symbolic abilities and love pretend play. However, Piaget found that these symbolic children showed very limited logical ability. They had difficulties performing logical relationships, and they seemed to show a little bit of egocentrism and some animistic beliefs. They didn't quite understand that the difference between being alive and not being alive. Okay, so Piaget believed this lasted from 2 to 7 years of age, and he argued that kids start out completely alogical around 2 or 3. He called this the symbolic function, and he said that as they get 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, you'll start to see these logical abilities slowly appear, but they're not fully matured until around the age of 7 years. Now, how did he demonstrate that children were symbolic but not logical? He would give them these things called conservation tasks. Now, if you look all the way on the other side, you'll see that this child, who is probably 12, is being given a conservation task, and I guarantee you she's passed it. So you'll notice that there are 3 glasses of water in front of this young lady. Now, 2 glasses are the same shape, and they're both filled with liquid. Now, if I don't know if you can tell, but looking at it, I can see that these glasses of water, these glasses contain the same amount of liquid, let's say water that's in them. All right. And they ask the person, do these glasses have the same or different amounts of liquid? And the young this lady's girl's going to look at them and she's going to say they have the same amount. Now you notice in the second square, they take one of those glasses and they pour it into a different shaped glass that is narrower but taller. Right? Now it's the same amount of water, but they pour it into a different shaped glass so it looks differently. They then ask this girl in the third picture here, and you see she's kind of smirking because she's not falling for this trick. They ask the girl the question, hey, do these glasses have the same or different amounts of water? Now she's probably 12 or 13, so she's not falling for this trick. But if you do this with your 3-year-old or your 4-year-old, you're going to find that they make a very interesting mistake. They will tell you that this water that they saw poured from one glass into another has now changed its volume. And if you ask your 4-year-old which glass has more water, they're going to say the taller glass has more water. This child is not logical, if you will. This child has not understood, does not understand that the properties of something don't change just because it looks a little bit different. This child can't conserve volume or length or number. And what Piaget found was that you could trick kids with these little logic tests uh, um, really easily from the age of 2 to at least 4, and then starting from 5 and 6 and 7, you could fool some of these children, but not all of these children. Now, what you're looking at over on this other side is a conservation of liquid task. He would also do a conservation of number task. So he put 2 rows of 5 candies and ask the child if they were the same or different amounts of candies, and the kid would say the same. He would then take one of those rows and spread the candies out so that they were still the same number of candies, but they made a longer line. And he found that the child would say, oh, the longer line of candies has more candies, even though it was the same number of candies, just stretched out a little bit longer. And so what he found was that children could not conserve the qualities of things. They got caught up in how things looked, and they didn't understand that the logical properties did not change. That's what's known as failure to conserve. So he found that children from 2 to 7 aren't really good at conservation tasks. Now, if you look at this picture of this young boy underneath me, he's doing what's known as the 3 mountain task. And this child is going to demonstrate that his thinking is a little bit egocentric. He doesn't quite understand that other people may see the world a little bit differently. So what they do is they bring this child and other children this age, and I've actually got a video of this kid. There's actually a video of this kid in your course resources folder taking this 3 mountains task. And what they do is they take this kid on different sides of this diorama here, and they have him tell them what's on this diorama. Now, if you'll notice you can't see it, but on the side closest to him, there's a little bitty animal. It's a fox. And right now in this video, this child is saying, they're asking this child what he sees, and he's telling them that he sees this fox. Um, on the other side, there is a pine tree, and you can see the pine tree. Now, from where that kid's sitting, he can see the fox, but he can't see the pine tree. They'll then move him around to the other side and ask him what he sees, and he'll say, I see the pine tree, but he won't see the fox. The trick is you then ask the child, they'll put a stuffed animal on the other side where the tree is, and they ask the child, what does the stuffed animal see? And because this boy is looking at the fox, he will say that the stuffed animal sees the fox. He's going to say that the stuffed animal sees what he sees and not what the stuffed animal would see from their perspective. So, in a sense, he showed that children's logical abilities are very egocentric. They reason as if everything is similar as their perspective. They don't understand that people have different perspectives. Okay. Now, Cosette asked a question about this stage. Do you believe pretend play is healthy for kids? Absolutely. I think it is an important part of the developmental process. In a sense, a child is practicing their schemes. They are trying to understand how the world works. So they're understanding what firemen do. They're understanding what nurses do, what doctors do. They are understanding and practicing their symbolic abilities. They're also practicing their social interaction. So I would say that pretend play is really, really important. Exactly. And Monty brings up a good point. If your child doesn't engage in pretend play, it's kind of a red flag because everybody goes through it. Great point. Now, he also found that children during this age would often mistake their stuffed animals for being live human beings. So they would say that their teddy bear is hungry, that their stuffed animal is tired or sad. Piaget found that if he asked children about the sun and the moon at this age, children would tell him that the sun went to bed at night so it could get some sleep and that the moon went to sleep during the day. Well, we all know that moons and suns don't go to sleep because you have to be alive to go to sleep. But he found that children during this age were very, very animistic in giving living properties to things that weren't alive. And finally, he found that children were not very good at seriating or classifying. Seriating is organizing things from smallest to largest. And most of you can do that quite automatically. But if you take a 3 or 4 year old, give them a bunch of pencils of different shapes or sizes, lengths, and have them organize those from smallest to largest, what you're going to find is that your 3 or 4 year old child's going to spend quite a good deal of time trying to figure this easy task out. They're going to have difficulty seriating. Furthermore, classifying objects. So if you're like me, you have one of those utensil drawers in your house with big forks, little forks, big spoons, little spoons, and knives. And take your 3 year old and have them put silverware away into this box. And what you're going to find is that your child has difficulty keeping the knives and the forks and the big and the small separate. They're going to have trouble putting them into the correct piles because they're not really good at classifying things into groups yet. Now, if you need any more proof, let's think about Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny. Now, I know some of you are from different countries and you may not have all of these imaginary things, but here in the United States, all 4 year olds believe that an Easter Bunny hops down the around the world bringing you chocolate on Easter Sunday. Here in America, children believe that if you take your tooth that's just fallen out and put it under your pillow, the tooth fairy will swing by that night and take the tooth and give you some cash. And furthermore, children around the world believe that there's this dude in a red suit that gets in a sled pulled by 8 deer that fly through the air, and that guy flies around the world and delivers presents to everybody on Christmas night. Now, all of you adults realize how ridiculous these three stories are. There's no way a bunny could bounce around the world and give everybody candy. There's no way there's a tooth fairy running around with dollar bills for people who have teeth. And the idea of Santa Claus flying with all the presents in the world around through the air with all the presents in the world is absolutely illogical and ridiculous. And yet, every 3, 4, 5, and 6 year old in the world believes these illogical ideas. So, what Piaget demonstrated was that children were logical, but not, I mean, symbolic, but not very logical during this stage. Okay. Now, children then move into the third stage of cognitive development, concrete and formal operational development. Now, those of you that are planning on being elementary teachers who are in this class, or children who plan on being teachers who plan on being elementary teachers, you are going to have to learn a lot about Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget is very important for early childhood education. And early childhood education is built with the understanding that children are logical, but not very good at abstract thinking. So when you're teaching a first and second or third grade class, these children are able to seriate, classify. They don't necessarily believe in Santa Claus anymore. They are quite logical. However, they're not good at abstract thinking. So if you're teaching first, second, third, and fourth grade kids, you have to have lots of hands-on things for them to touch. Whenever you go to the museum, a museum, you'll always notice that they have a kids zone, and that kids zone has lots of things to manipulate, to play with. And this is because we believe that children from around 7 to around 12 are logical and can be educated, but they require things to be concrete, things to be visual, things that they can touch and feel. And this is because they're going through the concrete operational period. And what Piaget argued was that children were logical, but not good at abstract thinking. They demonstrated the ability to seriate, to classify. They no longer fell for the conservation tasks. They were not animistic, but they really weren't good at thinking abstractly. And so Piaget argued, and what elementary educational theory would suggest to you is that when you teach children who are not quite teenagers, you have to make sure that everything is hands on. Now, think about this. How many of you learned about the solar system by making styrofoam ball planets? I don't know about you, but when I was in fourth grade, I had to make a diorama of the entire uh, uh, solar system. And I had to get a big sun, that was the basketball. And then I got a ping pong ball for Mercury. And then I got a baseball for Earth. And you had to get these different shaped, sized objects to represent the size difference in these planets. And you had to sort of paint them different colors. The reason we do that is because children at this age are not quite as good at abstract thinking, right? Now, he argued that some, but probably not all of us, then evolve in our teenage years into what he called the formal operational period. This is where we think logically and abstractly. This is when you can start teaching kids that really convoluted, complex math that's so abstract. All right. You try to teach calculus to your typical fourth grader, they're going to look at you like you're silly. But you can teach calculus to a 17-year-old, to an 18-year-old, maybe even a 52-year-old guy, right? And this is the ability to reason abstractly as well as concretely. And what he demonstrated was that children during this age, some of them begin to develop what he called hypothetical deductive reasoning, the ability to imagine future outcomes. Let me give you a story. When I was a kid, I used to live in this apartment complex, and we used to play tennis. We used to play uh, tennis ball, baseball in the tennis court. We would get a tennis ball, and we'd have a pitcher, and somebody would bat. And if you hit the ball and the pitcher, and you hit it into the net, and the pitcher got it before you got to first base, you were out. And we played ghost man. We basically played a two-person version of baseball. And we used to hit this tennis ball, and it was this tennis court lined up right behind an apartment complex. And we would hit this tennis ball, and sometimes if you hit a home run, it would go over there and it would bounce off of these apartments. And it was always kind of a cool thing to hit a home run so far that it bounced off the apartment buildings, right? But it was a soft tennis ball, so it never did any damage. Now, one day, I brought a real baseball out and I said, hey, let's play with a real baseball on this tennis court. Now, we were playing with a real baseball on a tennis court that backed up against an apartment building. Can anybody tell me what was likely to happen when we were playing baseball with a hard baseball on a tennis court right beside that apartment building, what was likely to happen when somebody hit a home run? Can any of you tell me what was likely to happen? Please tell me. And I know at least one of you can guess what the future outcome was going to be. Broken windows. Absolutely, Trevor. One of us hit a home run. Absolutely, we broke a window. I hit this gargantuan home run. It cleared the fence of the tennis court and went right through the second floor window of this apartment building. Okay, I'll give you folks one more guess. What do you think happened then? Can anybody tell me what happened after that? Can anybody tell me what happened after that? I'll wait for a second. What do you think happened? I'm sure some of you are going to type it in. We ran. Absolutely. We all, no, heck no. I mean, we took off, dude. Nope. We all took off running, man. Absolutely. We got the heck out of the house. It was the middle of the day. We did, Trevor. We scooted. Now here's the deal. If I had asked my if I had gotten trouble, my and I had gotten caught, you know what my dad would have done that night? He would have sat me down and he would have said, "Son, didn't you realize that playing with the hard baseball was eventually going to lead to a broken window?" And my answer would have been, "No, Dad, I had no idea." That's because I didn't have hypothetical deductive reasoning. And if you'll ever notice, sometimes kids do things without realizing what the consequences will be. Hypothetical deductive reasoning is the ability to imagine future outcomes, and it's a demonstration of what we might call abstract, formal, operational thinking. Now, I've got a video in the course resources folder, and I've got this picture right underneath here, this really weird picture of thumbs, and you're probably saying, why does Chris have this? There's a really cool question that they ask children who are pre-operate or concrete operational, formal operational. If you ask them, what would happen if people didn't have thumbs? And what you're going to find is that when you ask a 12-year-old kid that, they're not going to be able to think about the larger impacts of not having thumbs on the world. Whereas your formal operational kid will understand how the world would change completely if we didn't have this one body structure. And so, the what would the world be like if people didn't have thumbs is a great way to demonstrate children who can think about a future imaginary world and kids that can't think about a future imaginary world. Now, not everyone reaches stage 4 according to Piaget. Look around, watch your social media. You're going to see a lot of people do not have really good critical thinking abilities. Not everybody is formal operational, but some of us are formal operational. But in a sense, Piaget said that all minds evolve through these 4 stages. We go from pre-symbolic to symbolic but not logical, to logical but not abstract, to abstract thinking. So does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Now, one quick thing that I do want to talk about, people's minds also evolve as they get older. If any of you are around older parents or older grandparents, you're going to notice that you aren't as sharp when you get older. How exactly does the mind change when we get older? This is not Piaget, but this is sort of I want to talk a little bit about cognitive development in later adulthood. Research has shown that people's intellectual abilities really don't start declining until 70. Especially if you are engaged in exercise, you do weightlifting or some sort of resistance training, and a lot cardio. That's going to help keep your mind intact for longer. But intellectual decline a lot of times doesn't happen until your late 70s. However, your brain does change sort of in middle adulthood, and it's demonstrated by this graph right underneath me. You can think of your intellectual abilities as being in 2 different types: crystallized intelligence, which is the facts that you know, and fluid intelligence, which is your ability to think flexibly and creatively. And what research has shown is that our crystallized intelligence, our knowledge for facts, doesn't really go away. You still know what you know, even when you're 70. But what goes away is your ability to think flexibly and creatively. And that's going to peak in early to middle adulthood and start to trail off a little bit. So how are older people different from younger adults? They're not as flexible as thinking. They're not as good at problem solving. Um, and they don't think as fast. If you've ever been around an older person trying to figure out the internet, you're like, holy cow, you are so slow. They don't think as quickly and they don't think as flexibly. All right. Now, there are some people who do suffer from dementia, which is the dramatic loss in intellectual abilities. And there are lots of reasons for dementia. One that your book talks about in chapter 4 is Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is related to the loss of neurons that begin dying in your brain because you get these tangles, these plaques and protein tangles. And just like plaque is not good for your teeth and rots your teeth out, these plaques in your brain begin killing brain tissue, and that leads to this experience of dementia. There's no way to prevent or cure Alzheimer's disease. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it. However, research has shown that people who engage in aerobic exercise in adulthood, especially as you start to move into the 40s and 50s, is a great way to prevent the delay of dementia in general. Okay. Now, here's the thing. We are at 9:45, and I completely did not even get to uh, the other chapter, the other part of the chapter, and I'm going to try to do that really quickly if I can. Hold on, I'm opening up chapter 4B. Boom. Okay, there we go. All right. Great Anna is not and still on Facebook. Nice. Sandra says her great aunt is 90 years old and still on Facebook. Fantastic. You know, um, the neat thing is, people, there's great difference in people's intellectual functioning as they get older. And if you engage in the right habits and you don't smoke and you don't drink and you exercise or you live that farming life, sometimes you can prevent the mental decline from going. And we typically talk about what they call healthy, normal aging, and then people who are super agers. And some people keep their mental and physical abilities until late in life. And so that's kind of a cool thing. Now, I did want to spend a couple of minutes. I can't believe I've only got 10 minutes left. But so that was a theory of cognitive development. So if you remember on Tuesday, I talked about biological development. I talked about how the brain changes as we grow, this myelination and dendritic spreading. That's the biological development. Now, I just talked about Jean Piaget. That's a theory of cognitive development, how our mind changes. Now, another way in which humans change is socio emotionally. And there's a theory called attachment theory, which explains that. So, if you remember on Tuesday, I talked about critical periods in life. You know what? There's a critical period in your life where you will learn to be a social creature. The first year of your life, it includes a critical period where you must learn to attach to other people, right? So, how many of you have a boyfriend or girlfriend that you care about? How many of you have friends that you care about? How many of you love your mom and dad? If you have the ability to have warm relationships with friends, boyfriends, or your parents, you have learned the ability to attach to other people. You have developed attachment abilities. Now, attachment is a fundamental mammalian need because mammals, especially complex mammals like us, take a long time to develop. It is evolutionarily adaptive for us to work in groups. if we didn't work in groups, if we just had babies and then dropped them on the ground and walked off, kind of like snakes do. You know, when a snake is born, the mom doesn't care one bit. The snake is born and it's on its own, right? Human beings don't develop that way. We need to be nurtured for a long time after birth. So it is very adaptive for human beings to like being around one another. So attachment is a fundamental mammalian need. And what's going to happen during the first 2 years of life is you have a critical period where you have to learn how to attach to other organisms. You have to develop the ability to take comfort and want to be around other people. And human beings go through this attachment process during the first 2 years of life. Attachment is the close bond between an infant and a primary caregiver that happens during the first year of life. Now, if you look over on this far corner, we have the picture of a fellow holding a little monkey. Now, this fellow named Harry Harlow did the experiment that you cannot do with human beings. He took monkeys that were born away from their mother and raised them in isolation to see what would happen. And what he found was that being raised in isolation really, really messed these monkeys up. Okay, but what he wanted to do is he wanted to find out whether or not monkeys liked their moms because their moms were comfortable or because their moms provided food. Now, you may ask yourself, why do babies love their moms? Well, they might love their mom because their mom has the breast and feeds them. And that's a very good reason for a baby to like a mom. But Harry Harlow thought that moms provided far more than food. They provided comfort, they provide safety, they provide love. And so what he did was he took these monkeys that he'd raised in isolation, and he put them in these cages, and he gave them two mechanical mothers. And if you look at the picture here, you'll see there are two mechanical mothers. One is a wire mother that has a bottle that feeds the baby. Do you see that? The other mother doesn't have a bottle, but it's covered in this warm, soft terry cloth stuff that feels really good. And he put these monkeys in these cages with these two types of mom, and he measured how much time these monkeys spent with each of these moms. And he found that the monkeys only got on the wire monkey for food, but they would spend 23 and a half hours a day snuggling on the warm, soft mom. And so what he realized was that infants bond to their primary caregiver not because they want food, but because they want comfort. They want comfort. Now, why does this occur? Well, if you think about it, life is scary, and you have this amygdala in your brain that can light up whenever you're afraid. And if you think about it, if you're afraid, you're not going to explore. If you don't explore, you're not going to learn and develop. And so the idea was that maybe infants use the mom, the primary caregiver, as a secure base that minimizes the impact of negative emotions. So when I get scared, I hug my mom. That makes me feel better and my fear goes down. And if you've ever looked at a toddler, what you're going to notice is that toddlers stay close to their mom and they'll explore a little bit, but they're always looking back to make sure that their mom is there. And if you've ever had a child or a toddler, you'll notice that they'll crawl out and explore, and then they'll come back to you and touch the mom or hold the mom. And in a sense, what that child is doing is it is using its mom as a secure base to explore from. Okay, so this child is developing a secure attachment. So I've got a video of this in the resources folder. This lady named Mary Ainsworth wanted to study and see if children differed in how they were able to attach to their mom. Now, what she did was she worked on two children's very normal fears. Toddler children are going to develop two very normal fears that are not a sign of problems, but are actually a sign of normal social emotional development. Children that don't have these fears may actually have autism as well. Somebody mentioned that we had a red flag for autism. Same thing with infant attachment. Stranger anxiety and separation anxiety are two very normal fears that mean that your child is bonding to their primary caregiver. So if you've ever walked up on a mom or a primary caregiver and their child as a stranger, what you'll notice is that when that 2 or 18-month-old child sees you, they are often going to be quite afraid of you. This is called stranger anxiety, and this is completely normal, and it means that the child is bonding to their parent. You know what? Children who are 18 months or are a year to 18 months old, they often cry when their primary caregiver leaves them alone. This is called separation anxiety, and crying is called separation protest. And again, this demonstrates that the child is bonding with their primary caregiver and developing the ability to take comfort from that primary caregiver. Now, what she would do is she would bring people into this strange situation, into a laboratory observation, and she would bring them in with their parents. And then she would set up the experiment where the parent would leave the room twice. And one of the times, the parent would leave the room with a stranger in the room. Now, whenever the mom or the primary caregiver would leave the room, especially if there was a stranger in it, the child would always start crying. Uh, uh, Mary Ainsworth then got the insight that you can understand a child's attachment quality by looking at how easily they are able to be comforted by the primary caregiver when the primary caregiver comes back in the room. So the key variable was how the child responded when the caregiver returns. And she found that there were three general styles of attachment. Some of the children were quickly soothed when mom came back into the room those and began exploring. She called those children secure. And you know what? About 50% of the children she surveyed demonstrated this secure attachment child style. She found some of these kids, when the mom came back, the kids actually seemed angry and refused to go to the mom. They still cried, they were still unhappy, but they appeared to be punishing the mom. And this was about 10 to 15% of the children, and she called these children avoidant. They were not easily soothed, demonstrated anger with their caregiver, and they were what we called avoidant children. And then she found that some of the children, when the mom came back, were super duper clingy. They couldn't stop crying, but they couldn't let go of the mom. And she called these children anxious ambivalent children. Okay, and she found that about 15 or 20% of the kids were just like this. And she began to suggest that this had to do with caregiver responsiveness. During the first year of life, does your caregiver take care of your needs and meet your needs? And if they do, you're more likely to develop into a secure attachment style. Now, quickly, this has implications for how we love and how we do adult of romantic relationships. How many of you have ever dated a person that doesn't trust you when you're gone and calls you all hours of the day and has to keep talking to you? Does anybody have an anxious, ambivalent relationship partner that can't seem to be away from you and seems to suffer great anxiety when you're gone? How many of you have a relationship partner that doesn't share any details with you, that seems closed off, that doesn't seem to have the ability to take comfort from your romantic relationship? These are examples of partners who have anxious, ambivalent, or avoidant relationship styles. And research has suggested that your attachment style as an infant can predict how well you'll be able to bond with adults in adult relationships, especially adult romantic relationships. All right. You know what? I am not going to talk about Eric Erickson. We are out of time. Eric Erickson will be uh, represented on your exam. I'll talk about it a little bit in lab tonight if anybody wants, but we have run out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and make you read that on your own. Read the PowerPoints, read the book, and learn a little bit about Eric Erickson. He has, if you're going to nursing school, you are going to have to learn a lot about Eric Erickson. I've noticed from talking to the nursing students here at Wake Tech that they appear to love Eric Erickson in nursing school. So if you're going to nursing school, go ahead and read all about Erickson. Does anybody have any questions before I log off today? I am so sorry that we got a little bit behind. Developmental psychology is the biggest of all the chapters. If there's one chapter that needs to be 2 or 3 chapters, it would be the developmental psych chapter. But, you know, we only have a week to talk about this. Any questions? I'm going to go ahead and log off here in a minute. It's weird how there we go. There we go. Now my no questions. Thank you for the lecture. You're quite welcome, Sandra. Okay, folks, you have a great day. Don't forget, I'm having lab tonight at 8 o'clock. Optional webinar or 7 o'clock for anybody who's interested. Webinar at 7 o'clock, and your discussion boards are due tonight at 11:59 p.m. So don't forget to take care of that activity today. And the exam is available. I am recording the exam review. The same link that you will go to for the live review will also become a recorded link as soon as the lecture is over. That's a great question, Rasha. Anya, you have a great day. Folks, take care, and I will see you hopefully tonight at 7 p.m. Have a great day.